Welcome to the 3 Life Lessons podcast, where I, Rob Hubbard, talk to renowned figures from learning and development to uncover the secrets to their success and find out what makes them tick. Remember to like, subscribe and follow to ensure that you never miss an episode. So I have with me today one of the many formidable and proactive women that we are blessed with in our industry. So we've known each other for a good many years, where we very often have really interesting chats at industry events. And I always come away feeling quite invigorated, both by your ideas and your energy, which I find are just infectious. And I've also found that we have quite a lot in common. Now, you're the CEO of not one, but 2 brilliant companies, which I'll let you tell us more about. So welcome to 3 Life Lessons, Cheryl Clemons.
Oh, thanks very much for the warm welcome, Rob. Fantastic introduction. Really appreciated the invite and also the license to reflect today and spend a bit of time thinking about myself, actually, which is always good. So, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you and completely concur with what you were saying in terms of our conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, I've been looking forward to this one because as I've said on other 3 Life Lessons recordings, you know, very often I'm speaking to people that we know each other pretty well, and we get together and we talk about family and we talk about business and we talk about all kinds of things. But you very seldom say, okay, so what actually makes you tick? What are the things that drive you? So it's such a privilege to be able to do this. Well, first of all, Cheryl, can you tell us what are you doing now? And can you tell us kind of briefly what's the route that's got you where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rob. So I'm keeping very busy at the moment as the CEO and co-founder of Storytagger, which is storytelling tech that democratizes employee storytelling at work to build skills and influence change. So most people don't know what to say or recognize the value in what they have to share. So we basically designed Storytagger to give everyone the confidence and capability to reflect and share purpose-led work stories. So all based on sort of that lived and, importantly, learned experience. In terms of how I got there, and we probably haven't had this conversation either, but there are, I guess sort of many parts of the journey, and possibly all of it has led up to me kind of setting up Storytagger. But I'll just sort of pull out a few kind of stages that have had an influence and that are relevant. So I studied English and philosophy as a degree, following up with a cultural theory master's a few years later. And for context, I know you know this, Rob, this is all happening in the 90s. So just at the beginning of the dot-com era, before the boom and the bust. And the master's was really interdisciplinary. It included everything from kind of behavioural science to semiotics to, lots and lots of stuff from Bourdieu to Derrida to some fantastic thinkers and, the relationship to how we live every day. And I'd always believed in the power of stories, but this also cemented the importance of the sort of human context, the economic context, the social context in how technologies are designed and adopted. And this sort of interest in technology and its influence on how we communicate and do business crossed over into digital learning in the early 2000s. So I was working at a media business network called Wired Sussex, which was all about supporting and growing the digital sector in Sussex and the South East. In digital learning basically seemed to be a really significant economy in Brighton and Hove. This is in the old Epic days, for those old enough to remember. So we conducted some research, and yes, it really was very significant. So we basically managed to secure some funding, which led to us launching the Brighton E-Learning Alliance. So a few characters still around were involved in those days. And I was also heavily pregnant with twins at the launch. And it's the first time that I met Laura Overton, who came to support the launch, which was wonderful. Off the back of that, brokered a collaboration between both Brighton and Sussex universities to design and implement one of the first postgraduate certificates in digital learning. in the UK, and that had loads of input from the industry. And I have to say, I'd completely forgotten about that until sort of digging back into the past. But and then later, I had a very happy stint as communications director at Brightwave, and then that led me to starting Learner Lab in 2013 as a consultancy. And that was all about helping people successfully embed digital learning based on user research and engagement techniques. And as part of that, we used to take out a film crew to capture employee experiences and learning stories all around, showing the impact of learning and stuff like that. But we realised, of course, that wasn't very scalable. So we translated our experience and research into Storytagger about sort of 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
And there we have it. That kind of brings us up to where we are now. Obviously, plenty happening in between, but we'd obviously need a little bit longer for that.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating to see those threads as well. And I find it, I often, when people ask me about kind of my background and how I've ended up where I am, I go right back to university days and the stuff that I studied there as well. And you don't realise at the time quite how impactful it is and how you've picked that stuff because you're interested in it, but it kind of cements that passion. And quite often you might end up doing something very different in your career, but there's very often similar threads. There's a commonality between what you've studied and an aspect of what you do for a living. So it's fascinating to hear that here as well. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think not only are there threads, there's almost kind of loops as well. So, you might not necessarily draw upon something for a few years, but it's there kind of latent and it will kind of bounce back. So I think, what I do now probably has a stronger thread, connection with my degree at my master's than perhaps, some of the roles in between, for example.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, let's move on to your first life lesson. What would you like to share?
Thanks, Rob. So my first life lesson is everyone has something of value to share.
Ah, very nice.
So this is really, really important. You don't have to be a guru or a specialist to share or do something of value. And it's not always about technical skills or expertise. It can be lived experience and relatability, which makes all of the difference. Obviously, depending on the goal or purpose. There are certain times, of course, we always need technical skills. But that lived experience is really important. And I'm going to give a very personal example. But you'll see how it links in with how we can all make our contributions at work. So back in 2015, I had the privilege of doing end-of-life care for my mum. There were several reasons why she didn't want to go down the hospice route, and she asked me if I, alongside my brothers, would look after her. I was not a medic, obviously. I hadn't done this before, thankfully, and I felt completely ill-equipped, basically, to look after her. Totally. However, after a while, and sort of properly understanding the purpose of what I was doing, made me realise that actually I had everything that was needed. So I wasn't responsible for curing her or even keeping her alive, which was, quite a relief. The goal, my job, was about keeping her comfortable, providing company, laughs, love, and obviously in that I was an expert. So relating that to a kind of work situation, obviously there's loads of examples we could share on this, but if, for example, you're about to start an apprenticeship, you'll have lots of fears, questions, expectations. Hearing from the higher ups, as my son likes to call them, is great in terms of an official welcome. And maybe, the headlines on a company mission, for example. But hearing from someone just ahead in the journey can be the most invaluable input as they've lived it recently. And they can give some really candid real world experience about the lessons they've learned personally, and what they can do differently. So, this person just ahead in the journey, say a year 2 apprentice, won't be the best yet at his or her job. They won't know the company inside out, but they are an expert at what it's like for them to start an apprenticeship and be an apprentice in year 1.
Yeah, fantastic. That really resonates with me. There was a project that we did many years ago. We did the induction for University of Cambridge, so for people going to work there for the kind of central administrative function of the university. And we built, basically, it was an induction website, not an e-learning, it was a website. And as part of that, we went out and we filmed people who were new starters. So we took a proper film crew, we shot these really nice films of them, documentary style of them, where they were working, and then reflecting on their journey. But then we also said, as part of this, new starters, if you started in the last 6 weeks, we'd love you to record just a little video on your phone and send it to us, and we'll include it. It doesn't matter what it is. So people were kind of inspired by seeing these people who were just a few steps ahead of them, and they recorded these videos. And when we did the analysis of how the whole induction had landed with people, that was their favourite part. It wasn't even the videos that we'd shot, the professional ones. It was the little videos that people had done, because it was telling stories that were so relatable to them, and it really helped so much. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Oh, no, thanks for sharing that. And I can completely imagine how, you got that feedback. So no, thanks for sharing.
Very good. Well, what a brilliant life lesson number 1. So what about number 2? What would you like to share?
Yes, so life lesson number 2 is get to know yourself. Not find yourself. Very important distinction for me, being from a working class background and not having probably the privilege of having the chance to do that earlier on. Get to know yourself. So running a business, obviously there's no question that you have to work a lot on mindset, as I'm sure you may well have had to as well, Rob, in the past, big time. So it's probably taken me 50 years, but I can see now a tangible connection between kind of self-awareness, resilience, and personal growth, and incredibly helpful. Sort of seeing that and knowing that, dealing with the fast kind of cycle of ups, downs, and stresses of a kind of tech scale up, or running out any business, or probably even modern life. Let's face it. So, and something that has really helped me personally is meditation. So I booted up Headspace about 9 years ago, and turning up to meditate almost daily has been pretty transformative for me.
Wow.
It's been quite an interesting journey, because I've always had a very busy mind, and didn't think I could possibly sit still for 10 minutes without throwing my arms around with my thoughts. But actually, discovering that it's the very act of noticing you are distracted, which has the lasting impact, basically gave me a lot more confidence to carry on. So so understanding having a busy mind actually gives you plenty to work with in understanding the mind was a really kind of powerful realization. So that was really important, and it's probably a whole other conversation, but that increase in self-awareness has also helped me to recognise that you don't have to be an all-out narcissist to allow your ego to take over. And this relates to the whole growth mindset piece. So letting go of your ego, you also need to do that when you're getting kind of criticism, and use that positive feedback in a constructive way. So you use it as a learning opportunity. It's not necessarily just kind of boasting or anything like that. It's not letting that feedback cripple you as well. Is a really important part of letting go of your ego. So for me, I think leave your ego at the door means trying to be objective about stuff, observing it, being responsible for your own mood, reaction, and also what you do, with that insight. So yeah, I'm not saying that I always obviously achieve that, but getting a lot closer, and bringing some curiosity to that, and sort of leaning into different points of view and so on is obviously all part of it, and really, really helpful.
Yeah, perhaps part of that is being curious as well. You tend to be a more humble person if you are genuinely curious about other people and their thoughts and ideas and contributions and so forth. I mean, it is somewhat, you speak at conferences as well, and I speak at conferences, and it is intoxicating when you get up on a stage and everybody's like, this is what I say sort of half flippantly: if you want to be a leader, stand on a box, speak loudly. And I literally mean that. When people see you up on a stage and you've got a microphone and maybe that projected up on screens or whatever, then there's this kind of sense of, wow, this guy must know what he's on about. This must be an important person. And it gives you a little kind of rush. It's like your ego going, oh, look, see, I am worth something. Oh, look, it sort of puffs you up. And you have to be really careful not to let that run away with you. And something that I've found really helpful is, I define myself mostly as a designer. I design solutions to things. That's what I've always done. I've always studied. I'm a problem solver. And in order to do that effectively, you have to be curious, and you have to put your kind of preconceptions about, in that case, a solution at the door, because what you're trying to do is come up with the best solution, which might come from you, but more often it will come from somewhere else or a combination of different places. So it's kind of really, really interesting. I would love to learn more about ego and understand kind of, I view it generally as a fairly negative thing. That's not based on any kind of learned study or anything like that, but it seems to be quite a harmful thing, potentially, for a lot of people.
I mean, my understanding is that obviously we all have them. And it's how much you kind of listen and lean into it that counts. But it was, for me, I think seeing ego with both those sides was really, really important. So it wasn't just the peacock. It was also, the person that perhaps is going, oh my God, I can't possibly do this because they're going to think this of me. I've had this bad feedback. I can't now do X, Y, Z. Actually kind of understanding that is equally ego is really, really kind of helpful. I think one's more palatable than the other, of course. So I think we're kind of more inclined to lean into people that are struggling because of their ego rather than, fully puffed. And that's quite right, of course. But from an individual journey point of view, I think it's helpful to recognise when the ego is being the bad cop in your head as well, just to make sure that it doesn't last very long and that you can kind of flourish in whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I see. And then another thing I'd just like to pick up on is that daily meditative practice.
Yes.
Do you make is there a direct link between that and your increased self-awareness? Is it that fact of clearing your mind and clearing all of the busyness that's helped you learn more about yourself?
There is definitely a direct link from the meditation to me understanding more about myself.
Yeah, 100%. That's fascinating. Yeah.
And it's taken quite a long time. I literally have been doing it for nearly 10 years. And it was off the back of, a number of consecutive, interesting life events. And I just thought, right, we need to put some tools in place, basically, to kind of manage a very complex life, which we all have, And it's one thing I wish I'd done 20, 30 years ago. But better to start, when I did, rather than never. But really, really, really helpful. It is the habit, it's the act of turning up that is transformational. So, some days you might not have a particularly good session, or you might be extremely distracted or whatever, but it's actually just kind of, retraining yourself. And as I mentioned, I think pulling that, so if you are distracted, pulling yourself back to the moment, and it's that very act that you're retraining yourself. And if you didn't become ever distracted, you would not be able to train yourself on that, obviously, because you wouldn't have anything to work with. Yeah, very interesting. I must start meditating again. I meditated years ago for a good few years. I was suffering from a lot of migraines, loads and loads of migraines, and it was very helpful for that. And then it was one of those things, it worked so well that I stopped doing it. Stupid. What a stupid thing to do. Carry on doing it. It's a life's work, I'm afraid, Rob.
Yeah.
It's like so that and always learning a language on the go. They're my two things that I've basically decided to do until I die.
Very good. Good for you. Cool. Well, let's get on to your third and final life lesson, Cheryl. What would you like to share finally?
Yes, thank you. There was a bit of a battle for my third life lesson because I basically kind of started off with quite a lot and then tried to wedge it into buckets. But what one was, two things can be true at once, aka living in the grey. And some people might consider this a negative thing, actually. But I tend to live life in the grey, and I increasingly think that it's certainly the right place for me to live, rather than beating myself up about it. So it's not in a kind of ambivalent com si com sa kind of way, but in what I like to think is a very open-minded way. So this certainly doesn't mean that I don't have strong views, but there is often kind of an it depends. A different viewpoint or extra context which can change my judgment, and let's face it, as every LinkedIn post tells us, change is getting faster and the world more complex. So a need to accept that two sometimes opposing views or things can be true at once is actually becoming kind of more and more necessary. And it's a way to cope with uncertainty and feel comfortable with ambiguity. If we say kind of either or, you're immediately slamming the door on everything else, and we're likely to get stuck in quite binary or singular kind of ways of thinking. So a couple, I guess, of examples are from a kind of so from a sort of family point of view. I guess you can be sad that your child has left home, but simultaneously excited and proud that they're doing what they want to do, and there's less to tidy up and all the rest of it. You can feel horror that AI is automating loads of jobs, especially the creative ones, but simultaneously quite excited about how it's creating new jobs and there's an increasing need for human skills, et cetera, et cetera. So both of those things need to be navigated, and we need to pivot, as things change. So, we can't, if we only went in with one of those views, then obviously we'd be ignoring a huge amount of other kind of evidence and context. So basically, so when we're kind of looking for truth and making decisions, it's just really important to kind of acknowledge that nuance and the need for context or evidence to underpin it, and not get too stuck in the binary. And especially when everything is so polarized, and when we we even see this in our own industry, don't we? L&D is dead, long live L&D. There's a kind of tendency to want to go to an extreme view or the other. So I think it's kind of living in the grey and working with context is really, really important. But I must caveat all of this in saying that it's not an excuse for indecision. Obviously, you can't get kind of stuck in the grey. But kind of working with those two opposing views and just trying to understand what the context is around it and how they're navigated, I think is really helpful.
I see. So it's not a sitting on the fence. It's not a balancing of these views. It's a kind of an appreciation of these views, or could be personal feelings or whatever, and using that to better chart your course. Yes,
that's right. So they might be contrary. And in some, so the AI example potentially is completely kind of opposing. If somebody said one thing, you wouldn't have thought necessarily the other could be true at the same time. So the fact that two things can be true at the same time is basically a bit of an antidote to polarization and an antidote to making really bad decisions. You just need to make sure that you don't spend too long doing it, of course, but you just kind of understanding the context around each, I think, is really helpful.
Do I detect perhaps an element of the philosophy part of your degree in that kind of thinking there?
Probably. I think that they may well be. And I always remember kind of discovering that, I don't know, it's probably some kind of postmodernist thing in terms of the end of grand narratives and everything is more around kind of individual narratives. So I think I've always been a little bit kind of like, if there's an ideology or something that's quite extreme, if it's not kind of balanced at least by something else or understanding what's around it.
Yeah, we won't get onto extreme ideologies in this particular podcast. There's plenty of those around at the moment. But, we shall keep it positive. Well, Cheryl Clemons, it's just fantastic 3 life lessons, and thank you for being so generous with your stories and personal stories as well to really bring them to life. You've been a brilliant guest. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks, Rob.
If you've enjoyed learning those 3 life lessons, then make sure that you like, subscribe and follow so that you never miss an episode.